Since the 1993 Rio Earth Summit, we've had this focus on sustainable development, which is incredibly important to ensure that the economic activity and the social infrastructure that we're building today actually is not hurting or damaging future generations. Unfortunately, sometimes the efforts, however well-meaning, to achieve sustainable development have placed a significant amount of emphasis on things like technologies which don't necessarily exist, or technologies which have a significant amount of risk to deploying them. Whereas if we have Ecocide law, we are essentially ensuring that whatever economic activity is carried out, whatever infrastructure is built, whatever programs are being enacted, are not damaging the environment in a way which will damage the possibilities and the future generations that will come after us.
Cooper Union, what's happening with human rights around our world. And today we're looking at criminalizing severe environmental destruction, the development of Ecocide law. And we're very fortunate to be joined by three amazing advocates who have been involved in this movement for many years, and can begin to see an amazing example of how engagement has been able to transform international law to be able to address this most imminent issue facing humanity. It's very important to look here at the term of ecocide as it was coined by Yale biologist Arthur Galstone. He was watching millions of acres of tropical forest die under a herbicide that his own research had helped create. And he built on this important word the same way that was done after World War II, looking at the term of genocide. And today we're joined by Anna Maddrick. She's legal advisor on climate to the government of Vanuatu at the United Nations, and Anne is an academic advisor of international environmental and international criminal law with particular experience in ecocide law. And she's had several years of experience advising governments institutions on ecocide and has published extensively on that. Anna, could you share with me why you believe ecocide is one of the most important imminent issues that we must be concentrating on now?
Of course. First of all, great to see you again, Josh. Thank you for having us back on today. I'm very happy to be here. So ecocide refers to the mass or systematic destruction of nature. According to the definition which we will discuss today and which we ordinarily refer to, this destruction must be severe and either widespread or long-term. Now, the movement to criminalize ecocide largely focuses on its criminalization at an international level. So the addition of a fifth international crime alongside genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. These crimes are represented as being the most serious of the international community. And our work is to add ecocide law to this framework, to align environmental destruction alongside anthropocentric destruction. To us, ecocide law is one of the most important movements in law on the planet. Ecocide law has the capacity around the world at international, regional, and national levels. And the movement to criminalize ecocide has accelerated in recent years. From dozens of national proposals all around the world, regional criminalization in the EU, and most recently, an international proposal made by the government of Vanuatu, with who I work, supported by fellow Pacific Island governments of Fiji and Samoa, and later the African state, the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's now a diplomatic campaign to add ecocide at the international level. This is important for a number of reasons, not least because the environment currently isn't well protected within law, but also because of the implications that this lack of protection has for a variety of human rights, both in times of war and in peace. So yeah, there's a number of reasons why ecocide is very important. I'm sure we'll get into them a little bit today. I'm happy to pass on to my colleagues to expand upon that.
Anna, thank you so much. It's quite insightful. And now I'd like to move to Rodrigo. Rodrigo, amazing Chilean human rights attorney, former chief of legal department of human rights program in Chile, and former director of the Baltasar Garzón International Foundation in Spain. also a member of independent experts panel on the legal definition of ecocide. And I know you've been concentrating on ecocide law in Latin America, and it's important to see the latest developments as well as the exciting initiatives that we're undergoing in Santa Marta. Could you share a bit historically about the important role in your position as director of Stop Ecocide International for the Americas and what's happening lately in this important region that adds to the important work that Anna was sharing in the Pacific?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for being here, for the invitation. I am really happy to share this experience. Yes, I am the director of Americas, and we are making a lot of progress regarding spread the definition between governments and as well parliamentarians. And America's countries are adopting a lot of bill of ecocide law. And in fact, two countries already have this crime. One of them is Colombia, and the other one is my country, which is Chile. Both countries has already ecocide inside the legislation or uh, an article comparable to the ecocide law. Um, and what happened with other countries, for example, Mexico, Dominican Republic, um, Brazil, even Brazil, Peru, Argentina, are making the process to adopt the ecocide law. They have bill of ecocide law in the parliament, in a political discussion right now. Also, we moved this international definition between universities to talk with academics and students, of course, to share this initiative between students. And because of this experience, we are now in the process to adopt a model law for America's countries, because the international definition was thinking to be applied in the International Criminal Court. So if you want to put this international definition in internal legislation in America's countries or countries that share the same tradition, which is called in English civil law, is a principle of legality is very strong over there. So we need to make some changes, some adaptations. So because we share the same legal tradition, we are thinking to adopt a model law to facilitate the process to adopt the ecocide inside the countries. That's the process right now.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. And it's exciting to see what's going on there. And I hope we can get into the recent Escazú meeting that took place, but also in Santa Marta. But I'd like to move now to Lauren. And Lauren, it's an honor to be sharing this important stage with you. I know you've been working on this important issue, and we have some common aspects of you've been working with Peace Child International on navigating their global climate policy, as well as the Legal Pact in the United Cities and local governments, because we've been doing a lot in a way of municipal multilateralism. It's exciting to see the important work that you've done in this important field, Lauren, because most of the times we're always working at the global level, but also at the grassroots and the local level. That's exciting. I saw that you've worked with United Cities local governments. They're about to have their Congress in Morocco. And we've been working recently at that subnational level, or what we call municipal multilateralism. Can you share some of the exciting developments that are taking place with local communities and local governments and how it's moving all the way up to the global?
Absolutely. Firstly, thank you so much for having us here today, Joshua. It's great to see you again. I think it's really important to actually start at the local level for a number of reasons. Firstly, I think there's somewhat of a misconception about the fact that when people picture severe environmental destruction, they often imagine that it's happening in remote areas, or that it might be something that doesn't necessarily happen in cities or in urban areas. And what we actually know is that it's often cities and local and regional governments who are on the front line of responding to severe environmental destruction when it occurs. They're the ones that are tasked with providing essential services when the environment around them has been severely destroyed and is affecting the health and the ability to thrive of a community. So It's great that you mentioned the UCLG Congress about to happen in Morocco in Tangier. I will be there myself, and I'm really looking forward to sharing the stage with a few different municipalities and organizations that work with local and regional government on environmental matters and also on matters of peace and security. And I think Tangier represents a real moment for us to be able to, first of all, take stock of the progress that's happened. I think over the past 5 or so years, we've really seen local and regional governments taking strong leadership on environmental issues, particularly cities like Cuenca in Ecuador and The Hague and Konya in Turkey. There are a number of cities who are really leading the way on these issues. And I think it's time that cities also continue to lead on severe environmental destruction and highlighting the real impact that that can have on communities. I think Tangier represents a moment for us to continue to highlight this. And also, we're really hoping to highlight the conversation on ecocide and not just the fact that cities are on the front line of dealing with severe environmental destruction, but also the fact that they now have a large role to play in ensuring that ecocide law gets implemented at the national, regional, and international level. Cities have been strong advocates for a number of different human rights issues, and I think ecocide law needs to be at the forefront of these efforts.
Perfect. And Lauren, I think it is so crucial when we look at the municipal multilateralism. It really is communities that are usually directly impacted. And when we begin there, then we can actually look at the case studies of what has happened on all of the continents around the world, including the liquid continent. And as I move back to Anna, maybe you could share a bit at the national level, but also at that regional level. How has Vanuatu, the Melanesian Spearhead Group, and the Pacific played a prominent role in bringing up ecocide, but also leading in other environmental issues and making sure that the environment is at the forefront of global conversations and making sure that the UN doesn't ignore this important issue?
Of course. Well, Vanuatu, like many other small island states, is a very highly climate vulnerable state, which means in practice that they represent a country which historically has contributed the least to the environmental problem, but it is one of the countries immediately on the forefronts of the problem. Vanuatu, like a number of other islands, is already experiencing extreme weather events, such as cyclones, earthquakes, rising sea levels, extreme temperatures, which of course calls into question a variety of human rights for people living on the islands. So it's for this reason that Vanuatu, as well as other islands, have been very motivated in bringing international law and environmental diplomacy to the UN and various other forums. So in practice, this is translated to an advisory opinion which Vanuatu sought from the International Court of Justice, so the World Court, separate from the International Criminal Court, which last year handed down an advisory opinion on the responsibilities of states around climate change. Now, this was a very significant case. It came off the back of a consensus General Assembly resolution led by the islands. And the court ultimately decided that all states, regardless of their positions on environmental law, are under stringent obligations to both prevent severe environmental damage, but also to deal with the human rights implications of the environmental damage which has already occurred. So for Vanuatu and for other small islands, this is really an existential issue. So involved in a variety of different diplomatic efforts. As I say, the ICJ case is ultimately one of the most significant, if not the most significant, developments in international environmental law. And paralleling these efforts at the International Criminal Court, so bear in mind there are the two world courts, the International Court of Justice, which handles responsibilities between states, issues advisory opinions, and then the International Criminal Court, which deals with individual criminal responsibility. Vanuatu has had this two-tiered approach, where they've both sought the advisory opinion from the ICJ, but also been promoting ecocide as an independent crime at the ICC. Now, Vanuatu was in fact the first state to call upon all sovereign states to consider ecocide seriously as an international crime back in 2019. And since then, they have been a vocal state ally, culminating as I said, the 2024 proposal to the ICC to recognize ecocide as an independent crime. And the implications of this are that we're seeing a sort of mutually reinforcing movement. While there are advances at for example, the regional level, with the recent revision by the European Union on the Directive on the Protection of the Environment through Criminal Law, which ultimately has criminalize conduct tantamount to ecocide, or comparable to ecocide, meaning that all EU member states at the moment are having to align their criminal codes, their penal codes, to deal with ecocidal conduct ultimately. So this is happening at the regional level, but nationally, we're seeing proposals of ecocide law in all world regions. I mean, from Scotland to Mexico to Peru to Belgium, a variety of different countries. And so the implication is that there is a very clear movement happening at national levels, regional levels, and international levels. And I think one of the most inspiring things to come out of this is that this has largely been driven by the small islands, who traditionally don't play such a leading role in international diplomatic efforts. But of course, for this reason, it really represents a very important piece of history, not only in international criminal law, integrating environmental law into criminal law protections, but also for the small islands, and for their standing on the world stage, we could say.
Very true. In many ways, we can see that these islands that people have always referred to as small island development states are actually large ocean nations, and are sort of assuming their role in the world as leaders. And it's building on the point that you shared, had not done anything to really contribute to the climate crisis, yet the most directly impacted. And I love the way you brought everything together, where you can see now, really beginning with the students that organize from a classroom in Vanuatu at the University of South Pacific, to then go from the youth to the global, to meet with Vanuatu, to convince them. And as you said, it was adopted by the UN General Assembly to send that to the advisory opinion. And we were all there in The Hague during that cold December, but it was very important to see what the results were, that it was unanimous decision, and the important aspects of the law that were established. Maybe, Rodrigo, you could share with us a bit also the important Inter-American case that came up at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights with the advisory opinion and the International Court of Justice, and share how those two July rulings really did advance us to where we are today, and build that foundation that Anna was sharing about, reinforcing this important aspect of criminal law, human rights law, and showing the importance of really public international law to address this most dangerous aspect facing the people are directly impacted.
Yes, thank you. What happened is that we have the advisory opinion of ICJ, but we have another advisory opinion from Inter-American Court on Human Rights. Both are very important, and the International Court of Justice said that exists an obligation to prevent damage to the environment, and which is the concept that in Latin is erga omnes effect, is a general rule of international law. And what Inter-American Court of Human Rights use another terms in Latin, which is jus cogens. And the Inter-American Court of Human Rights said that the obligation of prevent irreversible damage to the environment is a jus cogens. What is jus cogens? Jus cogens is the core of international law. Is something that is absolutely mandatory, and no one state could avoid this obligation. That is very important. So, and this, the ground of this is the respect human rights, because in the ground of the climate change, of the ground of damage to the environment, we are affecting human rights. So those advisory opinion, in my view, open the door to strategic litigation in environmental cases. And yes, we have very important cases in the past. One of the last ones is La Oroya. La Oroya is the inhabitants of some place which is called Oroya against Peru. It's a case regarding chemicals with toxins because of mining. And yes, and people is burn over there with problems. Babies has problems, mothers has problems. So it's a very important case. And in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights say this is enough, could not stand that, and we need to change, and we need to compensate indemnizations and so on. So it's very important case. But after the advisory opinion, the door is open to be more strategic or more cases or more demanding, because what those courts are saying is that those obligations or those treaty that states or government happily sign are mandatory. So you have no excuse to not comply those obligations. That's it, something like this.
Thank you so much. And Lauren, as we shift back to you, I think it is important as we see this development in ecocide law and the growing body of human rights, we really see everything coming together. Could you explain to me how you shifted then your work to ecocide law from your background in sustainable development? Because I know I work a lot formerly as the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Mayor of Maui. We worked a lot on the UN 17 global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN 2030 agenda. Why did you make that important shift, and how did that then grow based on the basis of sustainable development?
Yeah, so I originally started working in the context of multilateral processes in 2020 when we were looking at the 75th anniversary of the United Nations and trying to understand where it is that the United Nations should move towards. I was 17 when I started working in this field, and I think I was really keen to ensure that in these processes, we're making sure that everyone has a voice, because the decisions that are made at these levels ultimately have such a significant impact on the daily lives of people all around the world. And yet those who are impacted often don't have access to those conversations. So that's how I started. And that work for me was incredibly rewarding. And I, through the work with Peace Child International, had the ability to contribute to all these different conversations. And I wanted to ensure that in doing that, we were giving opportunities to lots of different people to contribute. And in working on those processes and having those conversations, I began to grow frustrated that a lot of the conversations that we were having were incredibly important, but not always so impactful, in that many of the things we were discussing, unfortunately, so many resources and so much time and financial resources, which, let's face it, are limited somewhat in our field sometimes, were being used on processes which were very well-meaning but often didn't amount to much. And so throughout this journey, I began to grow increasingly frustrated with this. And so I began to look towards what can actually be enforced. Now, as you say, my background is in sustainable development. That's what I studied at university, and that's what I continue to be very passionate about. But I began to realize that there's actually a significant nexus between the enforcement of environmental protection and sustainable development, specifically ecocide law, and specifically when you look at the independent expert panel definition, which Rodrigo can tell you all about, as he was actually one of the members of the panel that wrote this definition. So, but in particular, using this definition and using the rationale created by this definition, you can almost 100% guarantee that if you have an ecocide law, then the development that you are enacting in your country is sustainable. Now, since the 1993 Rio Earth Summit, we've had this focus on sustainable development, which is incredibly important to ensure that the economic activity and the social infrastructure that we're building today actually is not hurting or damaging future generations. Unfortunately, sometimes the efforts, however well-meaning, to achieve sustainable development have placed a significant amount of emphasis on things like technologies which don't necessarily exist, or technologies which have a significant amount of risk to deploying them. Whereas if we have ecocide law, we are essentially ensuring that whatever economic activity is carried out, whatever infrastructure is built, whatever programs are being enacted are not damaging the environment in a way which will damage the possibilities and the future generations that will come after us.
And I think what we're really getting to is bringing up the aspect of enforcement and really implementation. And as we're all describing, we really look at what Indigenous peoples have always known. All of this is interconnected. Nature, of course, is a spiritual, it's a kinship, it's a reciprocal relationship. And in this industrial revolution and all the other development that's taken place, it's been more of an extractive one and not a mutual exchange. And I really appreciate that the Stop Ecocide movement really has grown to be able to bring together and build. Indigenous peoples began bringing up the issue in 72, once again in 1992 at the Earth Summit, but also in the UN Working Group on Indigenous Populations. That's first time where the Pacific brought up the issue of human rights and climate change and tried to bring those two together. And people would say, no, that's what you've got to go do over there. That's this climate. That's what you have to do over there in development. And what Ecocide and what your movement has been able to accomplish so far is to bring up that the right to a clean, healthy, sustainable environment that was adopted at the Human Rights Council, but before that, the UN General Assembly resolution has brought this forward. And then these legal cases that you're sharing have really been able to put this on the global stage, but then demand every government to enforce these laws. And as Rodrigo has shared, ergo omnes and jus cogens are then understood beyond the law. But what other people always know, that we can't live if our environments are being destroyed. Anna, can you share with us, we're on the eve of an important vote at the UN General Assembly that will take place this week. Yeah. But can you also then look a little bit ahead of what are the important issues that people should have on their radar and how they can get involved to support the important work that you're doing?
Absolutely. So yes, it's the eve of the final vote on the ICJ resolution, which I was referring to before. Vanuatu, with a group of other co-sponsoring states, has been putting forward an implementation resolution at the General Assembly, and states parties at the UN will vote on this tomorrow. So be sure to check that out when that comes out. And sorry, the second part of the question, which was to connect that to
how people can be involved with.
Absolutely. I think, of course, following Ecocide law, the Stop Ecocide movement is very broad. Of course, the three of us have different positions within the organization, but the movement itself is much broader. We have dozens of different networks, sort of spanning academia, indigenous, as you mentioned, business communities, faith communities, artists, musicians. There's a variety of different ways to get involved with Ecocide law specifically and to support the work that we're doing, which you can see on our website. And more broadly, I think paying more attention to small islands generally. They're very often unheard in diplomatic conversations. And as we've discussed today, the work that Vanuatu in particular has been doing in spearheading environmental protection at the international level is just absolutely monumental. So my advice would certainly be to follow Ecocide law, to see what's going on with our program, the various things that we're working on, but also to look to the work of the small islands and see if that can be supported, whether that's diplomatic or otherwise. So there's definitely a lot of important work happening on that. And I hope that as these conversations continue to advance and the International Court of Justice advisory opinion continues to be translated into reality, that we'll see advances in other movements, such as plastics pollution, regulation of outer space, other issues, as Lauren mentioned, such as quite dangerous climate technologies. So things such as geoengineering, which are increasingly being posed as a solution to climate change, rather than the real nature-based solutions in which we need. I think there's a lot of different stuff to be looking at, but yeah, my advice would certainly be to look at the work of Stop Ecocide and associated networks, and in particular, see supporting the small islands.
It is true. The Pacific Island nations have really been monumental, as you claimed. When you look at the Paris Agreement, the High Ambition Coalition with Ambassador de Bruyn leading the way to make sure that the world holds up those global standards, that really is life or death. It's an existential crisis in the Pacific, and they've done an amazing job at bringing it up to that level. Rodrigo, could you share a bit more about the regional? I know we've seen the exciting work of how we've been able to codify with the Orhus and then also Escazú. Can you share some of that a bit of what's happening at the regional level that brings us all together as we go forward, and how people can be involved with Stop Ecocide International at the regional level?
Yes. America's countries has a very important treaty, which is called Escazú Agreement, which is environmental treaty and is human rights treaty, and has 4 pillars. One of them is access to information regarding environmental issues. Another is access to justice in this. And the other one is to protect the defenders of environment. And the other one is democracy, is participation in making decisions of the authorities. So it's a very important treaty and has a mechanism very similar to what happened at the international level regarding committees of human rights, committee of torture, and so on. So Escazú Agreement has a committee that supervises the state complying their obligations regarding the Escazú Agreement. And yes, the participation of civil society in each summit, in each COP, is very important, and it's part of the decision of the states share the floor with the state, making decision regarding how to implement Escazú Agreement. But my concern regarding this treaty, very important treaty in our region, is that the following what said Inter-American Court on Human Rights, is that this treaty is already in force in the states, inside the state, they sign and ratify this treaty. So the plans to implement the obligations to Escazú Agreement is very important, but unfortunately, they are working slowly. It's a slow process. But according to American Court of Human Rights, this obligation are in force right now, not in the future when the state finalize this process to implementation. Is enforced right now. So regarding what we can do in strategic litigation is very important, considering this specific topic. And the relationship between Escazú Agreement and Ecocide law is very strong because Escazú Agreement pretend to defend the rights of nature, the right of defendant of environment. And this Ecocide law will prevent, if we adopt Ecocide in our internal legislation, will prevent that those kind of things happen. And regarding the defenders of environment, will change, will fix, will street the criminalizations, because now defending of environment are criminalizing for defend the environment, like a terrorist or something like this. And the companies has been protected for the law right now. But if we have enforced this Ecocide law, the people that in fact destroy the environment will be criminalized, and the people that will defend the environment will not be criminalized because they are defending what is very important for the entire humanity. So it's very important to put the things in the right position, I think.
No, and you framed it so well, because environmental rights defenders are really being criminalized and
Yes.
unfortunately executed as well for just doing what the government should be doing. In fact, they're the
Yes.
conscience.
Especially in America's countries. Especially in America's countries. Yes.
Thank you so much. Very helpful. And as we look in our final question, Lauren, it's exciting, of course, as we see the developments with Vanuatu's proposal to amend the International Criminal Court's Rome Statute to include that fifth independent crime of ecocide, but also the national legislation is important. Can you share how people can get involved, both in times of war and times of peace, to make sure that we pull everything together? Because as Rigo pointed out, he also talked about the treaty bodies, which is another sphere, which could be another TV show we could work on. But how can people get involved with Stop Ecocide International?
I mean, there are many ways. Like Anna said, Stop Ecocide works on many different levels. We are fortunate to have a fantastic network of associate groups in many different countries. So the first thing that I would say, if you're interested in getting involved in the movement to criminalize ecocide is to look for a branch in your country to find out whether there are opportunities to get involved in that. These groups are made up of fantastic wonderful volunteers who have moved the progress so far forwards. And so that's where I would potentially start. If there isn't one in your country, then perhaps you're interested in establishing one. That's something you could definitely get in touch with us about. And one thing I would say is incredibly important and is something that absolutely everyone can do. It takes no time to do at all. And that is to use the word ecocide. The diplomatic progress of ecocide law has been astounding, and we often speak to people who've worked on other international law processes who are just blown away about how quickly ecocide law is being established around the world. And alongside this, one of the reasons for that is because of the parallel movement within civil society and within the general public to put pressure on governments and to begin to understand the severity of the term ecocide. But I would say we need to continue to use the word ecocide because we need to understand that as we have a household term of genocide, we need to have this household term of ecocide because we understand that genocide is a line that is not crossed. And we need to have the parallel equivalent for the environment so that we can have a paradigm shift, which shifts our understanding of how it is we exploit the natural world. We understand that ecocide is a moral and legal line, red line, which is not crossed under any circumstances. So continue to use the word ecocide so that more and more people have awareness of the severity of the consequences.
No, thank you so much. And it goes back to the important work, as you were talking earlier about, the creation of the United Nations and the anniversary, of course, that's coming up this summer. But, Raphael Lemkin coining that term, and then Polly Higgins and people now carrying on this aspect of ecocide. It's a way that everyone can get involved and be a part of the solution as we move forward to really create a world for all of us to be able to live, beginning with, of course, the indigenous peoples who are protecting the land and have considered it an obligation based on one's own culture, to then understand that it's, as was brought up by Rodrigo and Anna, it's really a moral issue, but making sure that we then have the legal mechanisms to guarantee all these rights are enforced. Thank you all for all the work that you do. It was great to see everyone in Santa Marta, and look forward to seeing you at the next meeting as we keep building this movement to stop ecocide together. Mahalo.
Thank you, Joshua. Take care, mahalo.
Appreciate it.